is raised pretty high, right? To be the standard in law enforcement through three really important themes: leadership at every level, innovation, and a commitment to excellence, which is doing it to the best of our ability, which is the oath that our officers take. That's what they say. We'll do this job to the best of their ability, which means they will pursue their potential, which is why on the back of every SWAT card, does anybody know what it says? In a subdued graphic, refuse mediocrity, which means we won't be average, which is part of our culture. If we want officers to perform well and perform differently than what the media would have you believe we do or don't do, we got to have a strong culture, right? It's been a big part of what we've been working on. Branding, policies, having contemporary policies, very important. In Georgetown, 8 years ago, like the second year here, we hired a company called Lexipol, which is a national best practice firm that writes policy for law enforcement. It's like having a team of attorneys that follow federal law, state law, they follow the circuit courts, they meet with all kinds of outside organizations that sometimes are not friendly with law enforcement, right? To listen and learn what people want from law enforcement, and they work towards incorporating that stuff into policies. It's a best practice policy name. We've been using that for 8 years. Training, scholar, statesman, warrior. Those are the three things that I would tell you as a chief, officers need to do well. They have to be scholars. They have to be smart, because there's this ever-changing body of knowledge that they need to know to do their job. We have to be statesmen. That's our individual leadership to move people with words and not just words. Most important part of the job, 99% of the job is statesmanship, individual leadership, how we connect with people, our interpersonal skills. And then on the far end is the warrior side. And I'm going to show a slide because most people, when they hear that word, it's an emotionally charged word, right? Over the last decade, there's been all types of arguments and articles, probably bar fights over guardian versus warrior versus, that's the problem. I want to show you how we define it, because I'm not going to change a word because it makes people comfortable, right? That would be like me coming into your business, looking at your vision statement and your mission statement or your set of core values and me defining that for you. Does that make sense? What's most important is how I define that word for your officers and how they perform in the field, which is most germane to the conversation. So I'll have a slide I want to explain that. Training. How many hours do you think the state of Texas requires for police officers? How many hours per year? 40. 40 hours per year? Anybody have anything different? 20? 20?
12.
12 hours per year? We're lowering the bars. 40 hours every 2 years is what the state of Texas requires. 40 hours every 2 years. You think that's a lot or a little? That's not a lot, right? The national average for a population of 50 to 100,000 is about 44 hours, right, for an agency our size. How many hours do you think Georgetown averaged per officer per year last year? 100? Any other guess? Just one more guess. I could be certain. 47. How about 191? Is that a pretty big number?
Yay!
A lot of training at our facility, a lot of training. I mean, training is the only thing that moves the needle on competency. We want competent officers, we have to train a lot. So we spend a lot of time training. Communication de-escalation, we were doing that training before it was ever called de-escalation. That supports interpersonal skills. We can call it tactical communication. We can call it a whole bunch of things. It's just how we connect with people, right? So I'll elaborate a little more on that. Community engagement, the things we do to engage with the community. I think we do that relatively well for an organization, from chase to chief to a host of other things that we do. That's important. Hiring process. We work hard to hire engaged people. Like when we look at employee engagement, that's a driving factor in how we hire people. We want to see if they were engaged wherever it was that in which they came from. If we want to look at what separates extraordinary organizations from ordinary ones, it's engaged employees. Employees that are passionate about what they do, proud of their work product, and they're connected to the organization in which they work. Think about that in your workforces. Like statistics say 33% of your employees are engaged. 33%. The rest are not engaged. Doesn't mean they're bad employees. It just means they show up, they do their job, what they have to do, and then they go home. But you have a group of superstars, right? And what I mean by superstars is if you have to delegate something that your job depends on, and you have 10 employees to choose from, which one of those 10 are you going to you going to delegate that to? You going to delegate that to one that you know is going to get the job done, or one that's not engaged? Right? To look at that differently, if you have a rowboat and you have 10 people in a rowboat, that means 3 people are rowing. The other 6 are just standing there with a horse until the supervisor turns around, then they start rowing. Right? And occasionally you have that one person in the back with a corkscrew, just drilling a hole in the boat, right? Which requires a little bit of supervision and leadership, right? So we work really hard to hire the right people, because what I can tell you as a chief is if we can hire the best, most competitive, engaged people, does that make the job easier for supervisors? If they were engaged wherever they came from, all we got to do is teach them how to be a cop if that's what they want to do, right? And I've seen that dynamic change in the 10 years that I've been here, and I can tell you, as sure as I'm standing here, it works. But we got to hire the right people. We got to hire the best people. Leadership development. There's one component I want to talk about, but from our vision statement, leadership is very important to us, and we want to develop self-aware leaders at every level. And that means we got to have emotionally intelligent people, right? The better we know ourselves, the better we can connect and move people in front of us, right? Our mission statement is to serve with honor, protect with vigilance. And one of the things we talk about from day one is if we're going to serve with honor, who gets to determine if we serve people honorably? They do too. It's not the officer, right? But you ask a lot of young officers that what we do. No, we don't. If we're going to serve people honorably, whoever's standing in front of you gets to determine whether they were served honorably or not, right? So having a training curriculum built around that, it's really easy to tell officers, I want you to behave professionally. And if I polled everybody in here what that actually means, do you think we get a whole bunch of different answers? And then we have a whole bunch of inconsistent behavior in the field, right? So I'm going to talk about at the end one thing that we're really working on that is profound, and it's something I'd recommend for all of your organizations, and it has to do with this outward mindset. And then the last thing is Texas Police Chiefs Association Best Practice Recognition, which is an accreditation program. How many of you went to college? If you were going to go to college, did you go to an accredited university or a non-accredited university? Accredited. Yeah, everybody laughs, right? Why would you spend your money for a non-accredited university? Well, there are 2 programs for law enforcement to get accredited, one of which is in the state of Texas through the Police Chiefs Association. And there are 168 standards that I'll talk about. There's about 2,700 agencies in Texas. I think we were the 154th to become accredited through that program. I mean, that's pretty profound. 2,700 agencies, only 150, right? That separates us from most of the others when we talk about professionalism standards. So we'll share a little bit. I'm going to let you read this. Give you a moment. One more moment for the slower folks. Andy Webb.
The warrior.
He was making fun of me earlier, so I told him I'm going to have microphones. Okay, so if you heard Chief Nero talk about warrior, on some of the shirts I wear, you'll have it says Scholar Statesman Warrior with our logo. Is that a definition you can support as a member of the community? When I talk about that, that's what I mean. It's not about going out and using force indiscriminately. It has nothing to do with it. It's about this, right? Because there is a hard part of the job. Sometimes force does have to be used, and it's never going to be pretty. But it's how we do that that makes all the difference in the world. We talk about accreditation. These are the 12 critical areas. I'm not going to read those, but I'll let you know. Use of force is at the top. These are the 12 critical areas that accreditation really addresses. That's what it was designed for, right? It's to minimize risk in the agency, create more competency in the high-risk, low-frequency areas of law enforcement, right? So in all these areas, you have a great deal of training. You have a great deal of policy to make sure we're on a best practice playing field, right? So we look at that, some of the key topics that you see being talked about: use of force, how we deal with care, custody, restraint of prisoners, selection and hiring, dealing mentally ill, a lot of the contemporary issues. Some of what's being called for now is accreditation or certification, right? The last presidential executive order that was issued a couple weeks back, this is what they're talking about. In order to get federal funding in the future, you're going to have to be accredited, right? We've been working on that for probably 8 years. The process took about 2 full years, and last year in May, we were accredited, 154th in Texas, which is really a big deal. How many of you saw that in the media? How many of you paid any attention to it, right? Almost everywhere I go, nobody has a clue that your police department is accredited. That was like 5 years in the making, like 5 years of policy, training, and like mind-numbing work. Like you talk to troops about this, I don't want to say they dislike accreditation because they understand the value of it now, but it's a lot of extra work, right? But that lot of extra work creates competent people, and that journey is worth it. So that's accreditation. The community initiative. How many of you think that police community relationships are important? So let me ask you this. If you're the chief, who do you create relationships with? Like, let me get my pen out. You tell me. Who specifically? Who do I start with?
Rolling weights.
Rolling weights. My God. You're sad. I didn't know where you parked your car, sir. I didn't know where you parked your car.
Sun City Community Association.
Yeah, I want you to think about how simple that statement is, right? And how true we all agree community relationships are important. But there's 80,000 people here. 80,000. And all of our discretionary time, which is not a lot, who specifically do we spend time creating relationships with where there's a return on that investment?
Schools.
Right? When you wrap your head around that, it's a pretty daunting task to avoid criticism of not creating relationships, right, with the right people. Because are there a lot of wrong people? There's 80,000 people here. And we got some people that there would not be a good return on investment to spend time with. Sure. If we're being honest. Right? Yeah. So it's really about who. So this has kind of been our framework for how we create relationships with who, right? We have 7 groups of stakeholders that we have defined. Micro communities, which are our neighborhoods, right? Sun City, very different from Berry Creek. Berry Creek, very different from San Jose. San Jose, very different from the Ridge, right? All of those neighborhoods are unique and different. So the challenge for us is finding the right leadership within those neighborhoods and creating relationships, right? The business community. Business community and chamber, you break into how many sectors? Jim, like 12, right? From banking to real estate to retail, and we would go down the list. All those might have different needs from what they might want from the police department or what they want to talk about, right? Seniors, do we have a bigger senior population than most? The very first time I did this presentation, I had elderly. When I was in Sun City, I got squared away like that. Like, they were like, stop your presentation, open it up, edit that right now. Or you will not walk out of here alive. I was like, yes, ma'am. Quickly do that. Right? Our senior community is double what is normal for a municipality our size. I think the national average for 50 to 100,000 is about 18%. We're closer to 30%. Right? So that's important here. Media, faith-based organizations, social services, our youth, like those are the groups. And the vision for this is not just to create the right relationships, right? But let's play this out with a very simple example. Let's say I have someone like a friend, Bron Swain, who's in the faith-based community and says, hey, we're going to be in this particular underserved neighborhood and we're going to just do a picnic and we'd like you to have an officer show up. Well, how about based on the power of these relationships, we do one better, Ron. How about we'll show up with a bunch of officers, we'll even bring a fire truck because we know the firemen, they're not doing anything anyway. So we'll bring them out with a fire truck. And because we have relationships over here on the U side with our school district, we're going to talk to 2 of the coaches because a lot of the athletes do community service hours. So let's talk to the football coach and the baseball coach and get a couple of the kids to play flag football or wiffle ball with the kids, and they can get their hours in. And let's reach out to the business community and the contacts and maybe get some hamburgers and hot dogs donated and some water, right? And let's go to our senior group here and get some volunteers to help cook that and serve it, right? And then let's look over at our business community because there are, like Home Depot has those little kits for kids they do on weekends. Well, they also have an outreach where they'll come out into the community and do that just to serve the community, right? So just by the power of networking in these relationships, one little simple event, now we become, the police department becomes a conduit for bringing the community together. Like Like, isn't that what you'd expect? Like, no, that's definitely not what you'd expect to be seeing in today's world. Is that fair? And that's what we're working on, right? So we've been working in those relationships for the last 10 years, right? So recently, in light of national events, one of the next steps to take this to a different level we want to do is bring an advisory task force together, which bringing all of some leadership from those bubbles together into a room at the same time to work with us to talk about next steps for this initiative, right? And we've met twice so far. We met once yesterday on Zoom. Man, what a challenge that was. Working through technology with like 25 plus people. A couple of y'all in the room were there. It's very interesting, right? But we made some really great inroads and captured some really good data relative to what we want to be working on in the future, right? So these are some of the things we're doing. We want to capture the community's voice relative to building trust and legitimacy, right? And these other 6 pillars: policy and oversight, technology, strategic communication, community engagement, training, education, officer wellness, and safety. And it's really about, how many of you think that public safety is just our responsibility? Like, it's everybody's responsibility, right? And it's really not my place as the police chief to tell you what you need from the police department. It's my job to create an opportunity to listen to what you need from the police department and then do our best to provide that, right? Or if it's something we can't do, it's an opportunity to teach and educate, right? So many of those meetings I've had where we should be doing X, Y, and Z, once we sit down and start talking about the work we have been doing, do you think people feel more comfortable about what's going on here? Right, it's much like crime. My job isn't to change everybody's perspective about my profession. My job is to change everybody's perspective about the Georgetown Police Department. That's much like crime. My job isn't to eradicate crime in the country. My job is to eradicate crime in Georgetown. So if I kick it over to Round Rock or kick it over to Cedar Park, I've done my part. Y'all are safe, doing good things. Is that fair? Like, that's the job, right? But it takes a community to do that. And is it fair to say that, like, a lot of people really don't want to get involved or get engaged until they're affected? And once they're affected, they're generally upset. And that's like not the best time for people to get engaged, right? What this is about is getting more people engaged, right? Like yesterday, we just talked about building trust and legitimacy. Is that important for a police department? Mm-hmm. So now it's about talking to the community from your perspective. Ron Garland was there. Like, how do we do that? Help me understand from your perspective what that means to you. Like, what are your suggestions? Right? Where's some of the low-hanging fruit? If the police department just did X, that would take us one step further in building trust and legitimacy in the community. Right? When you give the community voice, it's much better for me as a police chief because it helps reduce criticism. Right? And when people feel more engaged and more involved with the quality of your public safety, like, that's important. Right? It's important to me as a chief. So that's what we're working on. And then we'll have a series of stakeholder summits. We're working through these listen and learn summits with the advisory group right now to kind of vet the process overall. And then we will take that process into all 7 of those stakeholder groups. Because if I ask this group in the business community what building trust and legitimacy looks like, and I get feedback, you think that feedback is going to sound different if I have a group of youth in here? Yeah. And what's important to our youth? Right? And it's taking that same template through the range of those stakeholder groups. And by the time we're done, we'll have a nice list of some good actionable items we can do to partner with the community. So that's what we're working on. Last thing I want to talk about is this book. Anybody heard of the Arbinger Institute? Not one person. Wow. Maybe one. I would tell you to write this book down, Leadership and Self-Deception. And there's a training program. I came across the book developing some mid-management curriculum for the Valor Initiative, which is a Department of Justice program I'm involved with. This book had such a profound effect. I went out to the Arbinger Institute, spent a week, went through all the facilitator training for it. And it's really about what's called an outward mindset, right? Everything that happens above the surface is our behavior. And I just want you to think briefly as supervisors. We spend so much time, if we want different results, focusing on our employees' behavior. How do we change their behavior? How do we generally change behavior? What do we do as supervisors?
Reward.
Tutor.
Rewards.
Say that again.
Rewards.
Reward.
Rewards. right? If it's not the behavior that we want, what do we do?
Write them up.
Yeah, we change, we correct them, we create a new rule, we create a new policy. That's how we try to change behavior. What we don't do is deal with all this stuff.
Yeah.
Right? We don't deal with the underlying, this is all what drives behavior.
Yep.
Is that fair?
Yep.
Like a person's mindset is what drives their behavior.
Yep.
That's why culture, for me as a leader, is so important. Culture starts to help deal with this. Right? If we spend more time on mindset, if I want officers to serve honorably, I got to have a framework for them to understand how to do that, right? This has answered that question. In my 30 years of public service, this is hands down the best training I've ever been to, and I've been to a lot of training. Best training I've ever been to help employees understand how to deal with people, how to be statesmen, how to lead people, right? There's a short video, 2 mindsets. Let's see if this will work.
Oops.
Looking at our mindsets shape everything that we do. Just think about your interactions with the people in your life, both the people at work and the people at home. And notice in your experience that in every moment, we operate from one of 2 mindsets. Now, with one mindset, we see the people around us as people. We're curious about and we're interested in other people because other people are important to us. We see their needs and their goals and their objectives. And when we see and we're interested in other people, we tend to go about our lives and our work activities in ways that are just more naturally helpful to other people. Now, of course, we've all had the opposite experience. We've all had times when we just don't seem to see other people. Times when we're just not curious about needs and the objectives of the people around us. In these moments, other people aren't really people to us. Other people are more like objects. Now, when we don't see others' needs and objectives, all of our activities, everything that we do, tends to be about us. It tends to be self-focused. Now, we might be really well-intentioned, but we just don't see our impact on others when we're inward because we're not taking others into account. The difference in our experience with other people, moment by moment, depends on our mindset. When we look outward and we see other people, we have what we'll call an outward mindset. But when we approach life concerned primarily about ourselves and our own needs, we have what we'll call an inward mindset. Just as we've all had our own experience operating from these 2 mindsets, we've also each had our own experience interacting with people who see us as people or who see us as objects. And we know what it's like to be with other people who have an outward mindset. We know what it's like to feel really seen by others, to be with other people who take us into account. And of course, we all know what it's like to interact with people who are just inward, people who don't see us as people. It's a very, very different experience when we don't feel seen, when other people don't take us into account. Just take a moment and identify those people in your own life who have seen you as a person. People who have been curious about you, interested in your needs and your challenges and your objectives. What impact did their outward mindset have on you? Just be on the lookout, pay attention, look around you, and try to notice those individuals, both at work and at home, that help other people feel seen. Observe them. See what you learn from them. Pay attention to how other people respond to them. And see what you notice. Good luck.
This is another way of looking at that, right? It's one of my favorite quotes from MLK. What do you see in our society right now? We build walls. We build walls around our teams, We build walls around our political affiliations, our religious affiliations, our sports teams. Pick a topic, like how we're conditioned as you jump on the team. Does that make sense? And if I find out you're on a different team, I don't even want to talk with you, I'll just talk at you. Is that fair? How powerful was that video?
Good.
Like the curriculum for law enforcement is it's the most powerful thing I've ever seen. And it's great because to watch the transition of officers who are going through it, especially our command staff, and it's like when you read it, you're like, yes, this is what everybody needs. Everybody else is broken. This is exactly, I love it. Until the light bulb goes on and this is me. This is totally me. Just depends on who I'm dealing with, right? Powerful. I'd encourage everyone, no matter what your business is, look into that book because it is transformational if you want a culture of people that understand how to work with people. Powerful, powerful, powerful. Is that what you'd expect to see a police department working on?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
You
George.
think that's normal?
No.
I can tell you no is the answer. And what we don't understand is that when we send officers out into the field, they get to see all of your heartache, all of your dirty laundry, all of your bad decisions, all of your heartache. Think about that. When we talk about the wellness of officers, that's all officers deal with all day long. All day long. They go to a scene and there's a family that died in a car accident. They go to a suicide call. They go to a family disturbance. They go to a burglary. Like that's the job all day, day in and day out. And we expect them to be well and to be cheerful. Does that make sense? Like it's a rough profession, right? It doesn't excuse officers that don't do what they're supposed to do. That's not what I'm saying. But sometimes I don't think we're outward towards the profession. I don't think we give consideration to what our officers go through every day, day in and day out, right? And I think it's great here that officers have so much support that as a chief, I can come to a chamber event and walk out of here with a cake, right? And that's a good day. It's a good day to be in Georgetown. So that's some of the stuff that we're working on. This has so much potential, and we are just starting to scratch the surface in this community issue to work with some of the leadership in the community, and it's just going to grow. There's going to be like a task force for every one of those stakeholder groups, from youth to business. So the business side, we'll be working with Jim Johnson here, and many of you might choose to be involved in that. But it's really about this: how do we turn Georgetown outward? Imagine if we can get that video moving in our community with all of these relationships and how we do things. Imagine how powerful that would be. Like, that's some of the stuff that we're working on. Maybe we have time for a question or two, except from Andy Webb. Yes, General.
So can you explain how you get the word out to the community on the good things that are happening? Because the only thing you ever hear on television is the reporter's scope is, you know, if it leads, it leads. How do we get the
That's a great question. So how do we tell our story?
Yeah.
Right? How do we tell the good? I don't know we have a great answer for that, right? Honestly. In the world we live in, like most of you get your news from where? Where most of y'all get it?
Quality media resources, not social media.
Is there such a thing?
Yeah.
You know, whether it's local papers, you know, I don't have a great answer for that because drama sells, but drama sells. That's the reality. Drama sells, right? It's not that good stories don't get told, but how many of y'all pay attention to the good stories? Like, we're all part of the problem, right? Let me give you an example. If you're driving home today and there's a wreck on the side of the road, everybody in this room has seen a wreck, right? Statistically, what's going to happen? You're all going to be like, oh my God, that's the most interesting thing I've seen all day. Smash! Now you're going to hit somebody else because when we have one wreck, we have 3 or 4, and the other 3 behind the first one are because people are just want to look at it because it's so interesting, right? Because it's drama and we just want to watch, right? That's part of the problem, right? When we do tell the good stories, whether we push them out in social media or like accreditation was in the paper, do we pay attention to that? Like the short answer is we don't pay as much attention to that because it's not as interesting. right? And I think that's the struggle, General, right? I think a big part of the community initiative and the stakeholder summits and getting feedback, strategic communication is one of the questions that we're going to ask the community. Hey, what do you need to know from us? How can we better tell our story? What do you want to hear? How do you want to hear it? Where do you want it to come from? Our social media, the paper, that's why media is a key stakeholder for us to tell our story. I'm not interested in the Austin media market. I'm interested in the Georgetown. Like my responsibility is to 80,000 people here, not the region, not the country. Right? So I danced completely around your question. That's the best answer I have.
Well, part of your task force ought to be coming up with some suggestions and answers.
Yes.
How to do that.
And I think some of the great dialogue that's already been coming is with this advisory group. How much more powerful would it be if we told your story? What would that look like if I had leaders from within the community telling our story, not just the chief, right, telling his own story? What if I had members of the community on a short video talking about accreditation?
It's been done.
Right? I mean, how powerful would that be? Right? So those are some of the things we're trying to work through, which I think will be powerful. Go ahead, question way back.
Well, as far as statement for that, I was a graduate of Oklahoma State, and our football coach got docked $1 million out of his paycheck because he had a more conservative news network T-shirt on when he was on vacation. Somebody got a picture of it. All of a sudden, our #1 running back says, "I'm going to quit because you wear that T-shirt." So that's one of the problems we have with the walls, is we say, "Oh, you're not legitimate, you are legit." And so
Yeah,
that's a big tough part for you.
I'd 100% agree with that. And I think when we look at our country's leadership, I hate to call that a circus, but come on,
It is.
right? Just watch how congressmen and senators talk about one another.
Yeah.
This is our country's leadership, and we're expected to act differently. I mean, I don't get it. I really don't. These are the best folks in our country to represent us,
They've been
and who
elected.
tolerates it? We do.
Yep.
And then we start doing the exact same things. And all of a sudden, all we want to do is be inward and be critical and condemn and criticize. And are we really interested in working together? Right? I mean, I'd like to think, yes, we are, but we're conditioned for the exact opposite. Right? That's what we're going to change as a police department.
Chief, we had a question online. It came to us and it said, at the very beginning of your presentation, you worded that troubling times is the challenging times. Can you speak to how you're working with your officers for this? I mean, they're out in the field potentially getting the negativeness, self-care. Is there anything you want to touch base with, within your team, and how what are you seeing from your officers out in the field?
So if I understand the question is, how are our officers doing?
Yeah, I think that's, I'm trying to paraphrase, but I think that's.
If I capture that, our officers are stressed, right? You have COVID, which is unprecedented. It's the strangest thing, like you're all dealing with here. It's the strangest thing like ever, right? And it's stressful. Stressful for us because we're the ones walking into houses and having close contacts. And a couple weeks ago, we had to wrestle a grown naked man with 103 fever, sweaty, with feces all over him. Like, that's your job, right? They get in the emergency room, like, we didn't arrest him. We took him into custody for mental health detention, right? And of course, they get in the hospital, we test positive for COVID. So now I have 5 officers that had to wrestle him and get him into custody safely. And now, do you think they've all been exposed? Like, doesn't get any more high risk than that, because you can't put all that PPE on when you're wrestling with somebody who's combative and doesn't want to go to jail or doesn't want to be taken into custody. So now they're off for 14 days. Now, how does that play out in your psyche when you just got exposed and now you got to go home to a wife that's about to deliver a baby soon, or you have 3 kids at home, or you have a spouse that's compromised already? Like, that's the job men and women are getting up every day to do for you, but often we don't think about that, right? And that's insanely stressful, because as a chief, how do I help you with that? Like, you got to go home for 14 days. There's not much we can do for you, right? Other than give you some guidance on how to stay safe at home. Wear your mask, isolate yourself, just like as if you have the flu, right? But it doesn't help them cope any better necessarily, right? So I think here, the cakes, the support, that the officers see that's tangible. Like what I need from the community is to overwhelm the men and women that are doing a job on your behalf that is difficult. Let them know that you care about what they do. Every place I've gone, I've said that, right? Every email exchange I send back out. And overwhelming, we've gotten cards, we've gotten food. Like a couple of days a week, there's just 30 pizzas showing because they want to feed the police. Like honestly, cookies, cake. Here's what I'll tell you, like healthy food would be awesome. Apples, bananas, like
Carrots.
cookies. Here's what I want. I want you to think ahead. When you really need an officer to show up to help you, like I want a fit one showing up.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? In case things go bad, fit, conditioned. If you've ever been to our facility, we have like 3 gyms on the property. Right? Let's not make it harder for them. Right? We give them an hour of duty time a day to work out. Right? Not sit in the kitchen where all the goodies and snacks are, like healthy snacks would be nice. But I'll just tell you as chief, like to answer that question, yeah, we spend a lot of time talking to them about it, right? If all the officers are doing is watching what's going on in the media and they're scrolling through Facebook at night, mental health's going to be an issue.
Oh, yeah.
Because all they're paying attention to is the negative.
Yep.
Right? So all the positive, we post up all over the police department. Stuff comes in like this cake, as soon as I get back, I'll send an email out, hey, was that the chamber? Support, somebody brought a cake. If it makes sense, I'll make sure I get your name so we can give full credit for that. But this is important, right? They got to know that the community supports them. And I think we have more of that here than most communities I know across the country. That's why our officers, over 70% live in the city of Georgetown or in our ETJ. That is not normal. I want y'all to understand that. It's not normal to have that many officers live in their own community. It's not. And it's different, and the culture is different. Like this is my community. This is our community. Like we have a vested interest in how things happen here and how we treat you. Because I know I might have to see you in church on Sunday, or I might have to see you in the grocery store, or I don't have to worry about where I eat because I've had to arrest 50 people that work there. Does that make sense? It's a different experience. And like we work really hard to keep it that way.
I want to make a comment, not a question. One of the things I've witnessed over the last 10 years in this community is when there's a major community event, law enforcement is there, but they're there under a tent where anyone can walk up and visit, and they're listened to, and their exchange is outstanding as compared to a perception that they're there to enforce laws. So you've already taken a significant step, and I know you're doing it in more than just the major events in downtown Georgetown. The other piece that comes to my mind and that's being worked on is simply the word listen. And in terms of Georgetown and Georgetownians, if we will be willing to listen to each other, but it has to be a two-way listening street. It can't be a one-way street. As we listen to each other, we'll continue to have a strong community.
Yeah, I agree. Listening is like,
Yep.
We got to listen with the intent to understand,
Right.
not listen with the intent to respond, right? Or we're just talking at each other. There's a difference, right? I appreciate those comments. Yes, sir.
Are you getting any inquiries from police officers leaving places like Portland and New York? Looking for better
The
jobs?
short answer is yes. Yesterday, I offered a job to a young man from San Diego, but there's other circumstances that are bringing him to the area. But yeah, there's, officers are stressed. I mean, imagine doing the job in a place where you don't feel supported.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd be looking
Man,
to
I mean,
leave.
it's like y'all can relate to being soldiers, right? You go back to the Vietnam era, you sign up to do a job, or you get drafted to do a job, and you're doing your job, and you come back, and what was the response like for those poor troops, right? I mean, that's. I'm just telling you, as a working professional, that weighs heavily on your ability just to cope with life. It's just very different, right? So when I say cakes, cards, and email to me that I can forward, like every one of those makes a difference. Because when the troops see more of that than they see the negative, they know they're supported here. While they might agree, yeah, our profession's under attack, at least when I'm doing my job, I'm appreciated and I'm loved.
Yeah.
Right, and that makes you want to do a better job.
Chief, last question. How can people sign up to be a part of the community initiatives, the task force? We're getting questions online about that.
Yeah, what I'd say is send me an email. There's a bunch of opportunities. What we started with you know, as a chief, it's just a coalition of the willing, right? What I did is started with existing relationships that have been built over a decade within those groups. And I brought those people that I have good working relationships with, right, that are not all yes people, right? These are people that will hold me accountable for doing my job, which is what I want. And then this is going to grow from there, right? So there will be some of the group, like we talked yesterday, some of those are going to come and go because people get busy and move on with other things. And within all of the other stakeholder groups, there's going to be opportunity because there will be a task force for youth. There will be a task force for business. So if you want to serve either on that leadership group, but there's going to be work involved, does that make sense? This is where you start finding out who wants to roll their sleeves up and not just be a critic, but actually do some work. Right? Because talking, like, we don't have time to just sit around and talk. Like, we want to talk and gather data that's actionable that we can make a difference with.
Yeah.
Like, everybody's time is too busy to sit around, and that's what social hours are for, right? We can do those at the chamber. We'll all meet here, have a cocktail with a mask on. Right? But that answer the question?
Yeah. That's for me.
Yeah, there'll be plenty of opportunity. Just shoot us an email. We can connect you as we get moving forward. Yeah. Well, hey, I appreciate this community. I appreciate the opportunity to get up and dress in this and represent you in the police department for the last decade. It's been an unbelievable experience. I am as sure as I'm standing here, it's not the same police department it was 10 years ago. And 10 years from now, it will not be the same police department that it is today. But what's most important is that we get leadership from this community involved and engaged in public safety. It is not just my responsibility, it is our responsibility, right? We just happen to do it full time. But we can't have a police department that you're proud of if you're not engaged. And with that, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank y'all.